and today I'm going to talk about what lies beyond microservice architecture, and I will try to help you to understand that a microservice architecture is not the last choice that you might have on your architecture. And to start that, I would like to ask you, raise your hand that if you remember about what is a bad smell from Uncle Bob when he's talking about clean code. Does anyone remember what does that means? No? Oh, so a bad smell in a code is when you are writing your code and you know that code that is not readable and you do not understand that and you have to do some refactor and then apply better practice for having a clean code. So this is what is a bad smell. And let me see, another question. Does anyone is working with monolithic architecture or something like this? Have anyone worked with it before? Oh, I see some hands. Nice. And how about microservices? Is anyone working with microservices today? Oh, everybody, more hands. Oh, that's interesting. That's in both of these architecture. I don't know how about you, but I usually hear this kind of question: that is it the right architecture? I see some people over here laughing about it. So you have ever heard about this question on your team or in your company, right? And I don't know, but 5 to 8 years ago, when microservices just start to be on the hype, everybody starts to think about it. That's, oh, I have a monolithic architecture, and I don't know, should I migrate to microservice? Should I go beyond it and try something new? And this question was something that I heard a lot of times about it. And let's talk about software, because we usually think about architecture, but software and architecture are working together. And what is a software? A software is a way to resolve problems through their features. You have a software, you develop your features to resolve some problem from your company, for some people, for anybody. And let's talk about features. What are features? We have it, not just software has features, but also some tools have it. And that's interesting that this is my first time in German, and I talked with some German, and they told me that a pint of beer, there is one kind of pint of beer for each type of beer. So if you are going to drink a different beer, you are probably going to drink it in a different pint. And this is a feature to 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 engage the audience for that. And think about software. Software is different than a tool. Don't you think so? Software has features and we improve it. And not just that, we create new features by the time passes. And that's why software is alive. Software isn't something that is static. You are changing it every day. You put some new deploys, and then this is alive. And for that, I like to think of as a software as a baby. So think about it. When a baby is born, it has some features, like a baby knows how how to cry, a baby knows how to breathe, a baby knows how to I don't know, maybe not so much features. It's like a software. When you release the first version of your software, it doesn't have a lot of features. And then by the time passes, the baby just starts to grow. He learns how to walk, he learns how to smile, he learns how to ride a bicycle, until he becomes an adult with a lot of skills that is similar to a feature. And then what's that? Let's take a look at how is the growth of a baby skills during his life. So when a baby is born, he knows a bunch of features like crying and maybe sleeping, and after a while a baby just starts to walk. And not just that, after another moment, a baby starts to ride a bike. And then, after some moments, that baby is not just a baby, but is an adult. And then it has a kid. And this is interesting, but when we take a look about how does the process of learning new skills happens to a baby, it it does look like a graphic. And when we take a look like a graphic, I'd like to remember that one of the degrees that we learn in university is the big O algorithmic complexity chart. And this is interesting because we've compared it on how is the process of a baby learning new skills to some complex big O complexity chart. It might be between the, I think that's orange, yes, the orange side, the orange zone, and the red zone. And I don't know how about you, but do you remember what does that mean when you have an algorithm that is on the red zone? Does anyone remember that? Oh, someone's there that's shaking their head. This is interesting because when we have an algorithm that with this kind of zone, we just try to do some changes on it because it will have lots of complexity, and not just that, it will consume a lot of resource, and it's not a good algorithm. And what about the software? Software is something that if we have that kind of notation, a big O and PO2 notation complexity, we are going to change it. And after software, we have our architecture. So behind every software, we have an architecture that might exist. And how about that? How we measure the complexity of our architecture? So one of the things that's I don't know if you have ever thought about doing that. Why not use the big O complexity chart to understand our architecture? Does anyone has ever thought about doing this? So let's think about not the simplest one, but the first architecture that a company might has, that is a monolithic. I don't know, does anyone doesn't know what's a monolithic architecture? Oh, one guy raising the hand. I like to think about that a monolith looks like this Lego box. And each Lego piece is a feature. So you have a box of a lot of Lego pieces. And so that means that you have a huge box with a lot of features. And these features you can separate from your box. It's closed there. And think about it. Let's start from the beginning. When you start your monolith architecture, your monolithic services, it's a greenfield. You choose your technology, you choose your programming language, you choose everything. And on the very beginning, you know that your software will have just a bunch of features, not that much, maybe some 3, 4, 5 domains. And then after a while, you start to develop more and more features. And with that, and after that, in some moments, not just the features will grow, the number of domains, the number of people that are working on that project, that will be huge. And then it just happens a change over here, that it starts to have more and more features on your project. And take a look at it. After some of you raised their hands, telling that you work with monoliths, after a while you might start to feel some bad smells about your architecture. I don't know how do you feel that, but who is working with monolith and suffers with a git merge problem? That's it. I don't know, you have 20, 30, 40 people working on the same code base, and then you have problems doing your git merge. Or let's talk about a version control. How do you control all the versions that you are going to put about your features? Or even think about the number of people that are working in the same code base. Well, one project that I participated, we had more than 100 people working on the same code base. That was a lot of people. So it's hard to find a way to everybody follows the same standards for the project. So, and then after feeling that's bad smells, not just that, but other bad smells, we came with the same question. Is it the right architecture? We think about it. So it's been hard to create new features. It's been hard to do a new deploy. It's hard to to do a rollback version. And then what happens? We just start to think about it, that some bad smells, they come to us and it's been hard to understand that after feeling that, after having that bad smells, in a moment you're probably going to feel that you might have an architecture change. So I don't know what can be this architecture change, but to think about monolithic, you can try to, I don't know, maybe change your monolithic to a modular monolithic, or maybe to a serverless architecture, or even going to a microservice architecture. But that's not the answer. The fact is, in a moment, you will have a possibility to change your architecture. And let's take a look at it. Why does that happen? One of the things that you might take a look is that the number of domains that you have on your project, it might be something that you can use the big or complex chart to analyze it and not just feel the bad smells. Let's talk about that. If you put it in a graphic, the number of domains and the number of the problems that you resolve on your project, you are going to be able to understand that how is the complexity that my project has. And let's talk about that. If it reads something like this position, and when we take a look to the big O complexity chart, it will be on the red zone. And to think about algorithms, when it's on the red zone, we need to think about doing some changes on it. And then the first thing that I would like to share with you is that understand the complexity of your project. Think about the number of domains versus the number of problems that you resolve, that you solve. It might guide you to a change. And then we come to microservice. Not that it will be the next step here after monolithic, but let's take a look how does it work. A microservice, I like to think about that being a bunch of Lego pieces in a table. I don't know if you remember, but Amazon and Netflix just shared these images that share the number of microservices that they have on their architecture. If I'm not wrong, it's something like 15,000 microservices from Amazon, and maybe on Netflix it's 9,000, something like that. And how does that works? Let's think about how complex is this architecture. And maybe it's not just like that, but some companies start to do something like this. They just separate the same colors together, the same services with the same colors together, and try to understand how will be the communication between them. But when we think about it, it's not so clear how is the communication between one service that is represented by one Lego piece and another service. And it is not so clear to understand that. But let's go back to the chart and let's think about how does a microservice architecture could be represented on it. So I don't know how many of you, but I would not recommend you to start your company using microservices. So that's why I put the start point as being a monolithic decomposition. Anyone doesn't know what is the composition pattern for monolithic? I think it's okay. So think about it. When you start decomposing your monolithic, you are going to start to split it into microservices, and then it starts to grow the number of services that you have on your architecture. And then I like to think about that not only one microservices, but think about a product, a new product that your company will have. You will create a bunch of new services. Usually, once one microservice represents one domain that will be exposed to your architecture. Maybe not just one, but you can have others domains inside of it. But usually, it's only exposed one domain, and then it just starts to grow by the time passes because your architecture depends on that. And then we talk about that Netflix, Spotify, and all these big companies, they adopted this kind of architecture. And what happens? How they do that? Because it's so complex to have this that it just came to my mind that this is so complex to have it. I can't imagine how Amazon and Netflix do that. And another thing that I like to remember is that if we just take a look at the big O complexity charts, this is what's going to happen. This is what happens here. It will be things like when we have our monolithic and when we start to feel that bad smells, that we are going to be on the red zone. And when we are on the red zone of a complexity chart, this is not something good. When we think about the algorithms, we start to think about recreating it, rewriting it to another solution. And what about our microservice architecture? Are we going to do that? Or is there something beyond that? And then talking about some bad smells, like I did with monolithics. When we have microservices, we have these are just three bad smells that I share with you. Maybe let's talk about infrastructure costs. Having a microservice architecture, it costs a lot of money. I know some of you raised the hand that use it. Do you have do you have a higher infrastructure cost? Do you have? Do you know how to manage it? Is it harder to manage it, the cost?
Yeah, it has to be a clear decision if you want to have microservice for parts where you need scalability versus monolith for smaller tasks which are not happening that often. So it's again a combination.
Yeah, that's a good point. And this is not so easy to understand what's your cost on a microservice. And it tends to be much more complex than just a monolithic. And not just that, let's talk about service coordination. How do you manage your sagas? How do you manage the information through the service that you have? And another thing that I like to talk about it is that if you do not develop tools for the developers, you are going to be in a hell. So think about having 3,000 microservices and you do not have a deployment tool that works. Or maybe your CI and CD pipeline isn't so good that developers can deploy their applications in a good way. Or even talking about monitoring, how do you do that? So these are some bad smells that you might face when you adopt some microservice architecture. And then it comes to the same question. Is it the right architecture? Are you even working with microservices? Is it the right architecture? I don't know. I just remember here, I should talk this on the monolithic example, but some time ago, if I'm not wrong, Amazon Prime just rolled back their serverless architecture to a monolithic architecture. I don't know if you ever heard about that. And this is what happens. What is it the right architecture for our company, for our team? And this is not an easy quest because when we are in a monolithic architecture, we understand that we have some possibilities on what to do about it. But what about microservice? Do you know what lies beyond it? How we can manage it? And this is so complex because this is not just one service that we're going to change. We are going to change a whole architecture with a lot of service. And then I come with my second advice for you. There is a book from Rebecca Parsons building the evolutionary architecture, it helps us to understand that we always need to think about building an architecture that will be open to change. I don't know if you ever read this book. I strongly recommend to. And then we come to the third topic, that is the distributed platforms. So I don't know if you remember, but I was playing with the Lego piece, and then we come to a much more complex way to see it. That's represented by a Lego city. So when we think about microservices, that were just a bunch of Lego pieces. Now we are going to migrate it to a new concept, a concept of having a city with a Lego city. And think about it, what's the difference between a microservices and a distributed platform? I like to say that, in a microservice you just have that Lego piece working on your architecture, and in a distributed platform you have something like a real city that will have the quarters, the neighborhoods, the buildings, and all that's working together. And I like to one of the things to explain that is that a microservice is a way to distribute your domains. Not, of course, you can follow a lot of microservice patterns like sagas and secret breaks and other stuffs, but by the end, it's on distributing your domains. And when we think about your distributed platforms, it's much like a way to organize them, to organize your service in context that you are going to understand how they work together. And I like to, as I said, I like to think it as being a city. Here I just took a photo of Ludwigsburg. I don't know if you recognize that. And this is interesting that when you think about architecture, there is not a lot of contents to talk about it. There are not a lot of contents to talk about how to manage a complexity architecture in microservices. But when we talk about microservices, there is the other side, the organization side. And then this is a other book that talks about it. That's the team topologies, that talks about how you can organize your teams over a company with a lot of people. And this just reflects exactly what happens in a city, but just a way to organize your teams. And talking about it, why does a distributed platform looks like a city? I like to think about that a platform looks like a neighborhood in your city. Think about it, let's say that you're going to have one commercial neighborhoods in your city that will be responsible to manage all the marketings, all the stores, and all these things. And even with that, we are going to have one neighborhood responsible for the residents. So a platform is a way to have one responsibility. And even with that, I don't know if you notice it, but a platform can have not just one build, it can have a lot of builds. So since one build can be seen as one microservice, on your platform you can have a lot of microservices. And as a neighborhood has a lot of residents, lots of houses. And this is interesting because when we take a look to a city, usually the city is divided by neighborhoods. And when we talk about splitting it distributing it in neighborhoods, it's going to be easy to manage the money that you are going to spend on each neighborhood. And you are not going to see a city as a whole. You are going to see the city in small piece. And then that's how it can help you. You just distribute your platform into neighborhoods or into platforms, and then you are going to split how you are going to manage the money that you're going to invest in each team, in each platform. And not just that, let's think about the communication between the platforms. if you build something like a public communication between one platform and another one, it will be much better than building a private one. Here on the example, just use it. If you want to go to one place to another, if you use it every time you on helicopter to do that, it's not going to be cheap. You're going to spend a lot of money. And the helicopter is something like the private communication that only one person or only one service will take advantage of it. So I do not recommend doing that. It's much more about doing a public communication, like having a street or even using a bus for that. Or let's talk about that. It could be just a message broker in an event-driven architecture that might help you to do that. And let's think about that. The last point about it is that behind an architecture, there might have a community. So it's not just about technology, it's about people too. And this is interesting because when we talk about a community, let's think about that. Our city, that it has a lot of neighborhoods. If they do not feel that they belong to the city, it's not something easy to do. So we must feel that our community, that people feel that they belong to something bigger. And I just took another photo that it was here in our events, that's a community in our code. So when you think about building our architecture or a distributed platform, we must think about having a community behind it. And one of the things that I want to share in the final is that we must feel the bad smells, must feel it, and it might help us to take some actions to go beyond it. So when we talked about having a monolithic architecture and something is hard to do, like doing a git merge or even trying to scale your service, you must feel that and then try to take some action about it. And not just that, one thing that can guide you to an architecture change is the uses of the big old complex chart to understand the number of domains that you have. Actually, this is a point that you are using math, you are using science, that you have the numbers, it's not a feeling, you have the numbers that prove that the growth of your architecture it has a complexity. Then you can use this in your favor to do architecture change. And that's it. Actually, I have some time for some questions, and if you want to connect with me, that's my social media. That's it. Does anyone has any question? Oh, there's one.
Are there any projects that you've worked on where you had to make this choice, and do you have any
Sure.
experience to share about it?
Yes. In the company that I work with, we distributed the things in context, and on the business units that I work with, we started with 3 microservices, and today we have more than 60. And then I started to do this kind of analysis when we should take this action to, not just have the microservice in our architecture, but build something bigger, like a distributed one. And this is what we are doing in the whole company. So today we have, if I'm not wrong, almost 3,000 microservices. And then 2 years ago, we started to do this kind of movements, trying to understand that we are going to build platforms and not just deliver microservices on the architecture. And to do that, we set a lot of boundaries between the communication between the platforms. So if you want to communicate to one platform to another, there are just some specific domains that you are going to access between the platforms. So it's not everything is posed between them.
Thank you.
How do you test the communication in such platforms? It's so many things.
Well, that's a good question. I would say that the communication itself is that's about exposing what you control. So your platform, you doesn't need to care about who is going to consume your information, but it's important that you be sure about what you are exposing. So we do not do this kind of test that I have one platform communication to another one that is going to do in the right way. We just make sure that I'm going to expose this domain, and if I want to consume one domain from another platform, I make sure that I'm going to do it on the right way. So we do not do tests between platforms. So I think that's it. Thank you.